Unlike other days filled with long meetings and official duties, this day was different. President Traoré had a plan, one he had shared with no one except his driver. He wanted to visit the central prison without warning. No press, no media, no preparation, just himself and his heart. "Drive me to the prison," he told his driver. "I want to see how the people in there are living. No one must know." The driver was shocked, but didn't ask questions. He nodded and started the engine. The black presidential vehicle left the palace quietly, escorted by only 2 plain police cars. About 40 minutes later, the car stopped in front of the largest prison in the city, Ouagadougou Central Correctional Facility. How can one unjust gunshot spark a movement that no one can silence? Follow along as we explore the story that changed a country. Before we dive in, let us know where in the world you're watching from. Leave your city or country in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. It was a bright Monday morning in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The sun rose gently above the city, casting golden light over the rooftops. At the presidential palace, the guard stood tall and alert as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out, dressed simply in a neat dark brown shirt and trousers. He looked calm but determined. It was a dusty place surrounded by high gray walls topped with barbed wire. The guards at the gate were confused when they saw who was in the car. The president of the country was standing at their gate like an ordinary visitor. "Mr. President," one of them stammered, quickly opening the gate. We were not informed." "I know," President Traoré replied firmly. "That is why I came. Take me inside." The prison warden, a short man named Monsieur Pascal, came rushing to greet him, sweating heavily. "Sir, if only we had known, we would have prepared." "I'm not here for preparation," the president said, walking past him. "Take me to the prisoners. I want to speak with them." Still confused, Pascal obeyed. He led President Traoré down a narrow hallway filled with echoes of footsteps and the distant sounds of coughing, shouting, and sorrow. The smell was strong. Dust, sweat, and hopelessness hung in the air. As the president entered the main prison block, hundreds of inmates stopped whatever they were doing. Some were sitting on the floor playing cards. Others were lying down looking tired. A few were praying silently. One by one, they stood up, surprised, confused, and amazed. The president greeted them humbly, shaking hands and asking them questions. "How long have you been here? What crime were you accused of? Do you have family?" Most of the prisoners responded with fear, unsure if this was a trick or a miracle. But the president listened patiently, his eyes meeting each person's eyes with kindness and respect. After an hour of moving from cell to cell, something happened. The president noticed an elderly woman sitting quietly in the corner of a small dark cell. She was not talking like the others. She wasn't even standing. Her head was bowed, and her face was tired. She looked like someone who had lost everything. President Traoré walked closer and stopped in front of her. "What is your name?" he asked. The old woman looked up slowly, her rheumy eyes filled with pain and sadness. "Emmanuel," she said softly, her voice cracking with age. "How long have you been here, Emmanuel?" "7 years, sir." "What was your crime?" Emmanuel swallowed hard. "They said I stole money from my employer, but I didn't. I worked for them for many years. They accused me because they wanted to get rid of me and hired their nephew instead. I had no lawyer. No one believed me. I am a poor woman." The president looked into Emmanuel's eyes. Something about her was different. There was no hate, no bitterness, just quiet pain, the kind that comes from being abandoned and wrongly judged. "Why didn't you appeal?" the president asked gently. "I tried," Emmanuel whispered, "but I have no money. My husband died years ago. My children abandoned me. No one visited me in all these years." A deep silence filled the room. The other prisoners listened. Even the prison guards were quiet. Everyone could see that the president was moved. President Traoré stood there for a long time, then finally spoke. "I believe you, Emmanuel," the warden gasped. "I said I believe her," the president repeated. and I will find out the truth." Turning to the guards, he gave an order. "Bring me her case file before the end of today. I want every detail. Who arrested her? Who judged the case? And who was the accuser? Everything." "Yes, sir," they answered quickly. Then he looked at Emmanuel again and said, "Your story is not over. I give you my word." As he walked out of the prison block, every prisoner stood in silence. Something had changed in the air. Hope, which had been buried for so long, began to rise again. Outside the prison, the president told his driver, "Cancel my meetings today. I am going to the Ministry of Justice." "But, sir—" "No excuses. An old woman's life is waiting." And with that, the black vehicle drove off once more. This time not just carrying a president, but a mission of justice. President Ibrahim Traoré sat silently in his office at the Ministry of Justice. The air conditioner hummed softly, but it couldn't cool the heat felt in his chest. Emmanuel's face refused to leave his mind. Those tired eyes, honest but defeated by years of neglect, haunted him. He had met thousands of people, shaken hands with leaders from around the world. But there was something different about that elderly woman. "Get me the Chief Justice," he said firmly to his aide. "I want him here now." The aide nodded and rushed out. Moments later, Justice Minister Dufour arrived, adjusting his tie nervously. He knew this wasn't a regular meeting. The president looked serious. Too serious. "Mr. President, you asked to see me urgently," he said, trying to sound calm. "Yes," Traoré replied. "I visited Ouagadougou Central Prison this morning. I met an elderly woman named Emmanuelle. She has been locked up for 7 years for a crime she insists she didn't commit." Dufour hesitated. "Sir, the courts failed her," Traoré said sharply. "Her case must be reopened. I want to know who judged it, who arrested her, and why she had no legal support. This is not just about Emmanuelle. It's about how many more like her may be suffering in silence." "Not just you," Traoré said. "Set up a fresh team, independent eyes, no politics, no games. I want truth and justice." Within hours, a small task force of honest lawyers and human rights officers was formed. They began digging into Emmanuelle's file. What they found was shocking. The case was handled by a corrupt judge who had been dismissed years ago for accepting bribes. Emmanuelle's employer, a wealthy businesswoman named Lauren Guira, had used her influence to speed up the trial. No lawyer had defended Emmanuelle, and the only evidence against her was a poorly written statement. One Emmanuelle claimed she was forced to sign under threat. "This is terrible," said one of the officers. "The old woman was framed. The whole trial was a setup." That evening, the president received the full report. He read every line carefully. When he reached the end, he closed the file slowly and whispered, "I knew she was telling the truth." The next morning, he returned to the prison, this time with cameras and reporters. The nation watched in shock as President Traoré entered Emmanuelle's cell again, this time with hope in his eyes. "Emmanuelle," he said warmly, "I have read your file. You were not only wrongly accused, you were abandoned by a system that should have protected you. I'm sorry." Emmanuelle blinked, confused. "You're going home," the president said. "Today." Gasps echoed around the prison. Emmanuelle looked around like she was dreaming. "Is this real?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, it is," Traoré said. "You're a free woman." A crowd had gathered outside the prison by the time Emmanuelle stepped out. She looked thinner, frailer, and unsure. She held no bag. She had nothing. But the sun that fell on her weathered face that day was not the same sun that shone when she entered prison 7 years ago. Reporters rushed toward her. "How do you feel, ma'am? What will you do now?" Emmanuelle looked down at her wrinkled hands, then up at the sky. "I don't know," she said softly. "I have no family, no house, no job. But I have hope. That's enough for now." President Traoré placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone." He took Emmanuelle into his official car and drove her to the presidential guest house. For the first time in years, Emmanuelle bathed with clean water, ate real food, and slept on a soft bed. The next day, President Traoré invited her to the palace. "I want to hear everything," he said. "Your childhood, your job, your dreams." Emmanuel told him about growing up in a small village, how she worked hard as a housekeeper for wealthy families, how her husband died young, how her children moved away seeking better lives, and how everything crumbled when she was arrested. "I wanted to spend my final years in peace," she said. "But life had other plans." The president nodded. "Well, life has changed again, and this time you're in charge." Emmanuel smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. That afternoon, President Traoré called a press conference. He stood before cameras and said, "Today, we correct a mistake. But this is not just about one elderly woman. We must fix a broken system. No citizen should suffer in silence. I will not rest until our justice system protects the innocent and punishes the guilty fairly." He turned to Emmanuel, who stood beside him in borrowed clothes, her hands trembling slightly with age. "Meet Emmanuel. She is not a criminal. She is a survivor, and she is now part of a new task force to help us investigate other wrongful imprisonments across the country." The crowd burst into applause. Emmanuel's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of hope. And just like that, an old woman forgotten by the world became a symbol of justice and change in Burkina Faso. "Call for a national audit," he told Minister Dufour the next morning. "I want to review the files of every prisoner who has served more than 5 years, especially those without legal support." "Yes, sir," Dufour replied, though clearly overwhelmed. "That's an enormous task." "Then we must start immediately," Traoré answered. "One innocent person in prison is too many." Meanwhile, Emmanuel had begun settling into the presidential guest house, but she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like a stranger in a new world. Everything had changed during her incarceration. The streets were different. Technology had advanced. People talked faster. Life outside was louder, quicker, and more complex. One evening she sat in the garden behind the guest house, watching the sunset. A young assistant named Joseph approached and handed her a small notebook and a pen. "The president thought you might want to write your story," Joseph said. Emmanuel nodded slowly, then opened the notebook. On the first page she wrote, "7 years in silence." Then she stared at those words for a long time. The next day, President Traoré invited Emmanuel to attend a special meeting at the Ministry of Justice. Seated around the large table were senior lawyers, prison officials, and representatives from human rights groups. "Today," the president began, "we will listen to those who haven't been heard." He turned to Emmanuel. "Please speak. They need to hear your story." Emmanuel rose slowly. She looked around the room and took a deep breath. "I was 73 when I was arrested. I was accused by the woman I had served for 15 years. Nobody asked for my side. I was beaten. I was forced to sign a confession I didn't write." She paused, her voice trembling. "At the trial, I stood alone. The judge asked me no questions. He simply read the charges and declared me guilty. I was sent to prison for 10 years. In prison, I lost everything. My children stopped contacting me. My friends disappeared. I tried to stay strong, but each day felt like dying slowly." The room was silent. Even the most powerful officials couldn't look her in the eye. "I'm not here to blame," Emmanuel continued. "I'm here to ask how many others are like me. Who will speak for them?" President Traoré applauded, and immediately everyone joined in. Not because they were told to, but because they were moved. From that moment, Emmanuel became more than a symbol. She became a voice. The president appointed her to head a new committee, the Justice Review Task Force. Their job was to travel around the country, visit prisons, listen to inmates, and find other innocent people forgotten by the system. Their first stop was a prison in Bobo-Dioulasso. It was smaller than the central prison in Ouagadougou, but no less crowded. Emmanuel, now wearing a white shirt with a badge reading "Justice for All," walked through the gates with confidence. Inside, she met a woman named Isidore, who had been in prison for 12 years. The charge was armed robbery, but there were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and the weapon was never found. "Why are you still here?" Emmanuel asked gently. Isidore looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Because I have no one, and no one believes me." "I believe you," Emmanuel said, in the way that President Traoré had once said to her. "And I will help you." Back in the capital, President Traoré worked harder than ever. He met with judges, police officials, and legal experts. He ordered training programs to help police better understand human rights. He told judges that hasty trials without proper evidence would no longer be tolerated. "This is not a favor," he told them. "This is an obligation." In the weeks that followed, Emmanuel's team found 27 more prisoners with no clear evidence against them. Some had no case files. Others had completed their sentences but were never released due to errors in the records. President Traoré acted on every report. He signed approvals for freedom. He authorized retrials. He compensated those wrongfully detained. The nation was astonished. Never had a leader shown such personal concern for the lives of ordinary people, especially those behind bars. But not everyone was pleased. Some powerful men who had controlled the justice system began to complain. "The president is making us look like fools," they said behind closed doors. "He's digging too deep." They didn't know that President Traoré was fearless. He had promised himself and Emmanuel that he wouldn't stop until justice reached the deepest corners of the country. One night in a national television interview, the host asked him, "Why do you take this so personally, sir?" The president smiled. "Because justice should never be the privilege of the wealthy. It must be the right of every citizen, rich or poor, educated or not, free or imprisoned." Emmanuel reminded me that leadership isn't about power, it's about people. That answer made headlines the next morning. Leadership is about people. President Traoré speaks on judicial reform. From all regions, people began writing letters to the president to thank him. Some shared their own stories, others requested help, and some simply said, "Thank you for listening." Yet the journey wasn't over. In a small village near Kaya, a woman wrote a letter. It was short, but powerful. "My son was arrested by mistake. He has been in prison for 9 years. Please help us." The letter arrived on President Traoré's desk just as he finished reading Emmanuel's notebook. He closed the book and whispered, "We've only just begun."